Hello YouTube. Back on one of my pet subjects that's, irritating us all a bit in the aircraft maintenance industry at the moment. PA28 and PA32 main spar NDT. This is kind of a result of the Embry-Riddle accident and one other many years ago that affected a PA28 when a wing came off. Okay, we're now required for affected aircraft to come up with this calculation here. We're looking for factored service hours. The FAA had one way of doing it, and the EASA and the CAA have now come up with, I think this stands for EASA factored service hours, a slightly different formula but based on a similar principle, and that is that you can determine the role of an aeroplane by how quickly it racked up its hours. All right, now that is true to some degree. If an aircraft is in a training role, it will probably be doing several hundred hours a year. If an aircraft is privately owned, it could be doing as little as 50 or 60 hours a year. So they've come up with this formula. Someone cleverer than me has come up with this formula, which kind of weights the factored service hours by how quickly the aircraft flew those hours. That's kind of okay, but it's a sweeping generalization because there could be an aircraft, and I've just happened to come across an example of that, which flew a lot of hours in its early years when it was owned by a training organisation, and then were retired into private use and flew very few hours in its last 20 odd years, and that's pushed the overall figure down because this takes an average across the entire life of the aeroplane. So I'll just give you an example of that. All right, I've plugged this calculation into a spreadsheet because it just makes it easier. And I think I've done it correctly, but I'm happy for someone to check my maths. I've done it several different ways. So we were looking at the aircraft total hours, D2, all in parenthesis, minus 100 times the age of the aircraft, 44 years. Okay, this first bit is all in parenthesis. I don't think this second parenthesis, which the CAA have put in here, makes any difference because both me and Microsoft would always do this multiplication first anyway. So that's the way I was taught, but it's in there anyway, it makes no difference. So the first part is all in parenthesis, the total flying hours minus 100 times the age. Okay, and then plus 100 times the age divided by 15. And again, this parenthesis here doesn't seem to make any difference the way Microsoft calculates it. Even if you put this whole final part of the equation into parenthesis, it still comes up with the same result. So I think we're fine on the order. It seems to be doing all of the multiplications and divisions, and then subtracting this from this and adding to this, which is the order I think most mathematicians would do it in. As far as I can see, it's correct. So we'll hit return there, and this is a Warrior aircraft I came across recently. It was built in 1977. The current year is 2021. So the age of the aircraft is 44 years. So the average annual usage is 204.55 hours. Okay, which could be somewhere between training and private use. Total time airframe was 9,000 hours, and that gives factored service hours, EASA factored service hours of 4893. If it's below 5,000, we do not have to do the non-destructive testing on the spar. So we might think, great. What I happen to know about this airplane is that from 1977 to 1997, in its first 20 years of life at a training school, it did 7,000 hours. So if this AD had come out in 1997, we would have had to do the inspection, because at 350 hours a year average annual usage, it would have been considered to have done enough factored service hours where we need to look for a fatigue crack. As we all know, the effect of fatigue is cumulative based on cycles, but for some reason with this formula, the hours flown from 1997 to 2021, in the last 24 years being 2,000 hours, with an average annual usage of 83 hours a year, that has subtracted 240 factored service hours. And if I subtract this from this, I get back to 4893. And so we wouldn't need to do the inspection because the airplane has got older, although the airplane has got older and has in theory got more fatigue hours on it, right? Because the calculation takes into account the average annual usage over the entire life of the airplane. I think that's right. So as far as we're concerned, for older airplanes, this calculation is not terribly meaningful. You've got to be careful if you've got some airframe hours above 5,000, and we've now decided on the blanket policy to take what the manufacturer, Piper, say in their mandatory service bulletin, which was you don't do calculations if an affected aircraft has got more than 5,000 hours on either of its main spars, you do the NDT. The AD still requires you to do this calculation to pick up the possible fatigue crack when you do reach 5,000 factored service hours. But for some aircraft we've got, that could be a very long time, because we've got let's use this line, a 1967, I think, or 69, and let's say it's a 1970 Piper Arrow. So it's 51 years old. And it's done 6,000 or 7,000 odd hours. You can see, disregard this one, that is nowhere near the figure. Let's put it up to 14,000 hours. Okay, it comes in then. So some of these older airplanes are going to have to get very, very high airframe hours, and they're now in private usage, they're never going to get there. So most of our fleet, if we do once at 5,000 hours and continue doing the calculation, unless they're in a training role, they'll probably never reach these kinds of factored service hours that require the AD. Anyway, food for thought. If any smarter mathematicians than me, of which there are many out there, want to check my calculations, please feel free, because I'm very happy to be proved wrong on this one, because it would alleviate a certain amount of confusion. Other than that, thanks for watching. Good night.